Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick comparison between the Sony Cybershot DSC-RX100III on the left and the RX100IV on the right. Now, in terms of pricing, we're talking about $750 for the roughly one-year-old RX100III and $950 for the brand new Mark IV. I would say the Mark IV is a successor, and technically it is, but Sony often does this rather than it actually being just a flat-out successor. It's more of a complementary addition to the RX100 lineup, and I say that because not only do they have a significant price difference, especially since the RX100 Mark III can be found at less than retail, something you will not find with the newer Mark IV, at least for now, since it did just come out on the holiday weekend, started shipping on July 2nd, and basically hit shelves, not shelves, but people's homes on July 3rd. But also, you have to think in terms of the actual differences between these two cameras, which is what today's video is all about. Both have a 20 megapixel, 20.1 to be exact, backlit sensor that is capable, a 1-inch sensor capable of fantastic images because of also great Zeiss glass on both cameras. The same lens, f1.8 to 2.8, across its entire range. So that's already a great thing. Both are capable of great video capture, but the key differences really boil down to video use. If you are someone who is video-centric or desires the best of both worlds, both still and video, then the Mark IV is where it's at, and that's because the body on the right, the Mark IV for $950 is capable of not only UHD video capture in XAVCS at 100 megabits per second, but it's also capable of recording 960 frames per second at 1080p. So you've got high-speed video recording if you are looking for that, something that does not exist, much like the UHD video capture here in the Mark III. You may have noticed the grip I have on the Mark III. That is an optional accessory, so you'll have to, at least for the sake of this comparison, imagine the camera without that, which is pretty much exactly what the Mark IV looks like right now, because Sony has not deviated from the design cue of the previous generation, the Mark III, and they had no reason to do so. They pretty much just improved upon it. This is slightly faster when it comes to how many stills it can successively take if you're interested in burst capture. Also, as I just mentioned, the video capabilities on the Mark IV, not existent on the Mark III. You are capped at 1080p at 60p in XAVCS, that is the codec. Of course, you can drop it down to AVC on either of these. You also have built-in OLED viewfinders on both cameras, but the OLED on the newer Mark IV is higher resolution with a broader scope of coverage. So if that's what you're after, that's definitely something to keep in mind when comparing these two cameras. In terms of real-world use, well, it depends if you're going to actually be using the viewfinder, because there are many people that don't, even though it's there. If you use reading glasses, then I can tell you right now, you should only be considering these cameras in the RX100 lineup, because they are the only two to offer built-in viewfinders. The previous generation, the Mark II, had a mount which no longer is here, a hot shoe that would allow you to use other accessories like an optional EVF, but since they've done away with the mount now, since this generation, that conversation is moot. In terms of the actual build, I said everything has pretty much stayed the same. You may have noticed that the actual zoom ring, which can be assigned to be a zoom ring, or your focus control has changed. Rather than straight edge here, we have a pattern design here. In terms of functionality, pretty much the same. I mean, I've noticed that it seems like the ring here is a little bit looser, but they're just about identical, even though the pattern has changed. Both of these cameras are made in China. Both have the exact same mode dial. Both have the exact same shutter button, zoom toggle, on-off. In terms of the flash, both have the exact same placement. I was going the wrong way there. For ejecting the flash, and you can see, again, design pretty much identical. At least to my eye, there is no noticeable difference. The LCD screen on both of these cameras rotates 180 degrees so that you can take a selfie. That is not something that differs from one to the other. However, if you go back a generation previous, to the Mark III, again on the left, you do not have that 180-degree tilt in order to capture a selfie. So that is a noteworthy enhancement that both of these models have that the previous generation does not enjoy. Beyond that, no weather sealing on either of these cameras, so if you're looking for that, this is simply not the right category. After all, these are point-and-shoot cameras. You do have a multi-port right there for charging, as well as HDMI out. That is also existent on the Mark III, so no deviation there. In fact, you can see pretty much identical Wi-Fi branding right there, because this is both wireless and does also have NFC on board. Sony also has the Play Memories application store, in which you can purchase as well as download free apps that will work with this camera. You can use your phone, iOS or Android, to control it, take pictures, take video, basically using that as a remote. There are time-lapse applications, video grading applications, a wide variety of different things. Just to give you a look at the back of the camera and what we're working with there, you can see again that things really have not changed at all. The video record button for on-the-fly quick video capture, same location. Thumb grip, exactly the same location. The menu and function button, also identical. The ring here for navigating through menus, the select button, everything is exactly the same. And that's because Sony really didn't have to do a lot other than add the features that so many video enthusiasts were looking for. At least in my case, I know I was looking for 4K in my pocket, and well, now I have it. And for those of you who are going to jump out and say, well, what about my phone? You know, my G4 or my Note 4 is capable of 4K video capture. Please stop right there. You are not working with a direct readout from a 1-inch sensor, that you do not have Carl Zeiss glass. It's just simply a comparison that's not, there's no equivalency. I'm not even going to say false equivalency. You have fooled yourself if you believe that. It's kind of like the old argument of more megapixels is better. Now, when it comes to low light shooting, you simply aren't going to find a better camera than either of these that is pocketable. And that comes down to the optics and sensor combo. They both have that backlit sensor, and they both have very fast Zeiss glass attached to it, something that Sony has made sure to do not just here, but in previous cameras like the RX1, arguably still one of the best fixed lens cameras, full frame cameras ever made. Leica just finally coming out with their model to try to match it, and quite frankly, it makes the old RX1 look like a value, and I'm glad I still own it. As far as whether or not you're going to want to add the grip, that's all a matter of personal preference. In my opinion, I think that it's a great thing to have, because if I did have one critique of this camera, it is that when it comes to long-term use, you do kind of find yourself wishing there was somewhere to hold on. And that's something they still haven't addressed, but they did in the form of, you know, a glue-on, a double-sided tape solution, which actually was made by other third-party companies, and then Sony made their own, figuring, why are we allowing third-party companies to make it when we should be doing it ourselves? So it's good that they actually picked up that ball and started running with it. In terms of the 4K video capture here, I can tell you already, yes, undoubtedly, it is far superior than the 1080p that you'll get out of the Mark III. Of course, whether or not you're able to actually play it back, leverage that quality, is a matter of whether or not you have a display to watch it on. But even if you're just looking to preserve memories now, whether we're talking about taking video of your children, grandchildren, whatever it is, you don't have to have children to want to preserve memories. This is where it's at, because UHD will ensure that you are future-proofing, granted at a higher price, in my opinion, a well-worth price when it comes down to making sure that your video is competent for a longer period of time and will stand the test of time, as opposed to 1080p. Granted, 1080p at 60p and in XAVCS here is fantastic. It simply can't live up to what you're going to get out of the UHD video capture here. Keep in mind that it is fixed at 5 minutes. So this isn't what you're going to record a recital with or a concert. This could be a great concert camera, but you better be seated very close to whatever you're watching, because you do have a limited range here, 24 to 70 millimeters in terms of 35 millimeter equivalency. So the reach is not incredible on either of these, but remember, this is a pocket camera, and for what it delivers in a pocket form factor, to give you an OLED viewfinder, which again is twice the resolution, I believe, to the Mark III, and then the video features UHD plus that 960 frames per second, if that does appeal to you. And I know a lot of people are going to say, I don't care about the UHD, and I don't care about the 960 frames at 1080p. And if that's the case, well, then the decision is really easy. You should be looking at the Mark III. And if you don't care about the OLED viewfinder, then maybe you should be looking at the Mark II. Save yourself some more money, because that is what each generation really represents in terms of updates and upgrades. So there's no question the Mark IV is all about bringing video competency that simply didn't exist in previous generations of this camera, as well as many other cyber shots, because this the DRAM stacked design of the sensor is something that they've also brought to the RX10 Mark II, which I plan on sharing with all of you once I get my hands on one of those, which it has been pushed back for those of you that are curious why it's not on the table right now. This is something that Sony has done that has set yet another new standard for the point-and-shoot business, because it is combining not only UHD but high-speed photography, something that simply doesn't exist in this segment. So I really like what Sony has done here. Whether or not you're going to want to spend the $950 really comes down to whether or not you care about those video-centric features. And the 5 minutes, at least for my personal use, when it comes to something I'm fitting in my pocket, is perfectly adequate. I think this predominantly has to do with heat issues, and that was Sony's way of addressing it. In my opinion, again, it's going to be more than enough for me. 5 minutes may sound short, but and especially if you're watching my videos that sometimes go up to an hour or even a little bit more. But again, for my own purposes, for a pocket camera, 5 minutes is pretty much perfect. Here, you're not going to have the 5 minute limitation, but you'll be working with 1080p. And by the way, if you work with 1080p here in the Mark IV, you will not have that 5 minute limitation that is reserved only for UHD resolution. So really it comes down to whether or not you care about UHD. And I'm going to continue to argue that for those of you that say, well, I'm not a video person, I really don't care about video. If you ever find yourself shooting in video, you should be looking at something with UHD. Also take into account the fact that with UHD, you do get 8 megapixel stills out of that video. So that really equates to never missing a moment. I know that may sound dramatic, but it happens to be true. I can't tell you how many times shooting UHD video, I was able to capture something even in a still form, forget the video form, that I otherwise would not have gotten had I just been shooting in 1080p or trying to just get a still of my subject. So that's another thing you should take into account when making this decision. So not only does UHD future-proof you on the video side, but it also allows you to get stills that otherwise you wouldn't, and do so with a lot more ease of use, because here you are just hitting the record button rather than hitting that shutter button like a machine. This is faster, as I said, when it comes to successive shots, but in terms of a pocket camera really achieving new heights, that isn't really, I think, what anyone is looking for, because this is a pocket camera after all. And when it comes to pricing, the RX100 did set a new standard in cost in its own right. So it is a very expensive camera. Many people would argue, why wouldn't I go into an interchangeable lens system if I'm going to embark on a $500 and up journey? But this is all about getting the best of still and video capability in your pocket. Some will argue these aren't pocketable. Well, depends on your pocket size. At least for me, these are far better travel buddies than the much larger cameras that I would traditionally have to rely on in order to achieve this sort of still and video, now especially video capability that the Mark IV has to offer. So you can't go wrong with either of these cameras, but again, if you're trying to decide if budget is relevant, then obviously you should be looking at one of the older models, because they're beyond competent, they're still best in class. The sensor has only evolved a little bit, moving from front to back lighting, which is important for low light capability, which both of these models share. But in my opinion, again, if budget is not an issue, then the Mark IV is the easy decision. There's nothing else like it on the market. You're not going to get a camera into your pocket with this much power, capability, and overall flexibility, and still really in a form that traditionally would require compromise. I mean, the original RX100 set a standard, and every generation since, the standard, that bar has been raised, and the Mark IV is no exception. Many people out there will dismiss it, saying we're getting close to $1,000, and really all they added was UHD and 960 frames per second that I really don't care about? Well, I have to break the news to you folks. This is another standard, another level, another bar that has been set for the competition. I mean, Panasonic was out the gate prior to Sony with UHD video capability in point-and-shoot cameras, the ones I covered, the FZ1000 and LX100, and both of those were great cameras. Sony finally answering those cameras, those offerings with the Mark IV and the RX10 Mark II. So even though Sony is not the first this time, they still are offering it in a form factor that's unmatched, and with the RX10 Mark II, you have the added benefit of also having that high speed, that 960 frame per second video capture mode that no one else is offering. And I'm pretty sure the FS7000 is where this is really the technology is coming from in terms of its capability. And that's a camera that I'm not even going to talk about price point. Yes, it's aged, but that's a Pro Series video camera. So really not comparable in any form or fashion to what we're looking at here, but that tells you about the technology, that DRAM stacked design that's inside the RX100 Mark IV. So even though these cameras look a lot alike, I can assure you that when it comes to the video side and even still performance, granted still performance, it's not a leap, it's just a step. The video side, it is a leap. It's a huge jump. And in my opinion, if retail is where you're looking at, especially if you're outside the US, that may be the case, then the money is definitely well spent, the bump up in price with the newer Mark IV. But again, stateside, if you can find one of the previous gen RX100s and still imaging is still your first priority, then it's going to be very difficult to argue for the very expensive, nearly $1,000 Mark IV. Of course, over time, both of these are going to continue to drop in price. The Mark IV will eventually go on sale, and it will only become a more compelling offering. At its current price, I think that it's very expensive, but again, when you look at the fact that nothing else compares to it, that's where, as usual, Sony is able to command a price unlike anyone else. And the fact that really there's still nothing to even match the Mark III, that keeps pricing there firm. Even though I have seen it below retail, you're not going to find it on a fire sale. And that's why, again, Sony will reiterate that even though this is the Mark IV and this is the Mark III, they are complementary. In fact, Sony is still making the Mark. I'm not sure that they've phased out the Mark II. I think they have, but it is still available new pretty much everywhere. I'm not sure that they're still actually actively manufacturing it, but they very well may be. And that's because, again, the Mark II, Mark III, and Mark IV just represent different price points for different consumers. And Sony has grown to learn that about their cameras. Rather than discontinuing a product, they realize it can actually act as just another price point for a different consumer who has very close, I would say, preferences for what they plan on doing, but not necessarily the budget to bite off Sony's latest and greatest. And that's what this comparison's all about. So you can't go wrong with the Mark III or the Mark IV. Again, the Mark IV, more video-centric. Definitely, even though they look a lot alike, what's going on under the hood here, far more advanced because of that stacked DRAM. The backlit sensor here and lens pairing is going to give you a little bit of an edge, but keep in mind that the processor in both of these the same. The Bions X is powering both of these, so that is yet another argument for those of you that believe there isn't a huge leap here, again, if you're not interested in video. So at the end of the day, if video and the best of both worlds is your primary goal and budget is of no concern, Mark IV, no question about it, at least so far with the shooting I have been doing with it. Granted, I do have to spend more time, at least what I've seen out of the box, spending a few days with it. Things look great. Nothing else like it, literally, figuratively. I'm a happy owner at this point. And this is not a review unit. I did purchase this like pretty much everything that I share with all of you that follow my channel, my reviews. But the Mark III, on the other hand, still a stalwart, great performer that you just cannot go wrong with. It's going to beat everything else in the business other than its now younger sibling, the brand new Mark IV. But at $950, definitely a tough price tag to swallow. Both great cameras, really a matter of budget and personal preference. In my case, the Mark IV hands down takes the cake because it does offer everything you could want without compromising. I mean, beyond the fact that you're stuck at that 5 minutes, I mean, you have the added bonus of 960 frames if the mood strikes you. For me personally, that's not even that relevant. It's all about the UHD video capture, which, I mean, I've been shooting in UHD for the channel now for over a year, so it's fairly obvious. I've been waiting a long time for Sony to give us UHD in a more pocket-friendly form factor because carrying around a camcorder is far from ideal. Now I've got something I can take with me everywhere, and as we all know, often the best camera you have is the one with you. So the RX100 Mark IV is my personal choice, but again, you cannot go wrong with the Mark III, or I'll go even all the way down to the 2 or first-gen original RX100. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.